Howdy everybody. So last week I posted my Weird Fishes Arpeggi Minecraft note block build. This thing was a huge project. It's an absolute behemoth of a build. Over 1,500 blocks long to the end. The duration is around 5.5 minutes. It covers the whole song. And I've gotten a lot of requests to make a tutorial on how to build this thing. Now, this thing is just way too big to go over every single block. So what I figured I would do is instead go over all of the different techniques that I used to make this song. There's a lot of weird stuff going on that I don't know if many other people are doing, so I want to just explain all of it and hopefully help you guys make your own note block stuff. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's start with just the intro here. I've got a command block with the play sound command, making that villager noise at the beginning, imitating that weird grunt that's at the beginning of the song. And then here we've just got the drums. Now you see this is split into two different parts. And this is something you're going to see all throughout this build of where I'm using distance to make certain parts of the song quieter, right? Certain instruments. So up front, I have the kick and the snare drum about as close as they can be to the player, loud in the mix. And then further away back here, I've got the hi-hat and the snare drum ghost notes back here. For the hi-hat, I'm using the same instrument as the snare drum, the sand block, but pitched up a lot higher, where my snare drum notes are at about 10, and then these hi-hats are pitched all the way up around 21, 19. I'm doing this trick where I'm alternating the pitches just slightly, just to give a little more of like a human element to the hi-hats, as well as with these ghost notes, having them pitched a little bit lower. So let's go ahead and listen to that again. Pretty cool. It may not seem that different, but if I go ahead and stand in the middle here, it immediately loses so much of the sound. And then here we've got the guitar rhythm coming in. This is pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to show how I'm using a consistent rhythm through here. So every one of these blocks has a 4-tick delay repeater in between it. Effectively, that's a quarter note at this pace, at this tempo, and then shooting off of each one of those is a repeater set to 2 ticks of delay, giving us our 8th note subdivision. Now, if you are building something like this in survival, this gets pretty wasteful after a while, but because I'm building in creative, I do it like this to have a very uniform, like every, 4th quarter note of this measure is all lined up right here. These are all playing at the same time. It makes it a lot easier when you're making a large-scale project like this to make sense of where everything is. So then all the way back there, I've got the second guitar part coming in. So this is our main first guitar part here. And then in the original song, there's this second part that plays kind of a more atmospheric role. It's a lot quieter in the mix. So the way I'm replicating it is pretty strange, where I'm alternating between the pling sound, I'm alternating between the pling sound and the flute, which are both higher octave instruments. They're both pitched up an octave above the normal note block sound. And then I also have it just super far away from the player, so it's just barely audible in the mix. If you're right nearby it, it sounds pretty horrible. I'll let you guys hear. Pretty weird, but if you step all the way back, it blends together pretty well. Now here we've got the bass coming in, and this is another example of if I was building this in survival and I was, worried about resources and space, it would be very easy for me to kind of include that in the drum module. As you can see looking through here, there's just a lot of wasted space, right? And this doesn't need to be its own module. There's so many repeaters here just for a couple of notes. But because I'm building in creative, I'm making it its own instrument, because then whenever I take this section and copy it over, let's say in the future I need to duplicate all of this but not have the bass in. If I had built it integrated into this part, then I would have to go through, find every one of those blocks, break them. It would just be way more of a pain than if I, now can just go through, select this whole area, and cut it out if I need to. Also, I have purple dotted lines for every 16 bars, the start of each section, and then these red dotted lines are marking every 4 bars. This makes it really easy for me when I'm going through, building the melody in by freehand or whatever. I can say, oh, okay, the downbeat of this measure is right here. Makes it a lot easier, and that's really essential to have that kind of organization when you're doing this big of a song. For the melody here, I'm using this technique of where anytime you're powering note blocks with repeaters, it's super easy to put together 2 different sounds just by placing the note block next to each other. So I'm using a blend of the bit sound, which is like a 8-bit kind of retro noise, and then the harp, which is just the default Minecraft note block. One of the biggest restrictions with note blocks is that there's no way to control note length. You can't get a sustained note, you can't make a note shorter. Whenever you power a note block, it's going to make the sound that it's going to make, and that's it. Here we have this background vocal, which in the original song is really, reverbed out, ethereal, has a lot of sustain on it. So to replicate that, I'm using the bell and the chime sound, which have a lot more of a ringing out to them than other note blocks. You can hear that note rings out a heck of a lot more than this. So it's the perfect candidate for getting that ethereal background vocal sound. So at about this moment in the song, the drums finally change after just playing the same part over and over again. They switch from the hi-hat over to the ride cymbal, which gives this huge atmospheric lift that just feels crazy and, keeps the song building and building and building. But unfortunately, I could not find any way to replicate a ride cymbal sound with note blocks. Maybe somebody else can. I would love to hear it, but I wasn't able to do it. And so later on, after I had finished the song, I was going back through looking for little tweaks to make. And I thought, this moment I still want to have some kind of lift, even if I'm not able to do that. So what I ended up changing instead is I made the kick drum pattern change here to be a lot more active. So as before here, where it's just playing these, 2 notes occasionally, it becomes really active here, which is not present in the original song, but I think it helps with this build to still translate that change in vibe. I'm not making like a 1-to-1 cover here. I'm not doing like a completely accurate transcription. I am making an arrangement where I'm adapting the song to sound better with the restrictions of note blocks. This bridge section is another good example of changing the arrangement of the song to work better within the parameters of note blocks. My first draft of this, I did a really accurate transcription of the guitar part that's here, as well as this piano part that's kind of atmospheric in the background, very similar to the guitar 2 part in this first section of the song. But when I built it out, it just didn't really work. It was just too complicated, and so I simplified it down a lot. I just totally got rid of that piano part, and then I simplified this guitar part down to just these 3-note groupings with not a lot of variation. And so, with this part, I was able to just build the guitar part about exactly as it was in the original song, and it sounded great. But here, I had to adapt it a little bit to work within the very limited restrictions of note blocks. So this section, while not having that much built here, was really difficult. In the original track, you've pretty much just got the drums going while there are all of these weird atmospheric noises going on, and that kind of stuff is not easy to recreate in Minecraft. So the way I went about it, I've got a dragon head here on top of a note block to give that big sustained weird noise at the beginning, and then this flute part here, which is really cool. So I mentioned earlier that you can't make sustained notes in Minecraft, but I kind of found a way to do it. So I was messing around in Noteblock Studio, and I just made like a constant stream of 16th notes, which this is at 150 beats per minute, so that's really fast. Like not a lot of space in between those notes. Specifically with the flute instrument, there is quite a bit of note length for that, a lot more than like a harp or a bass instrument. But also the attack doesn't have like a hard start. It kind of opens up softly. There isn't like a click or a pling at the beginning. And so when you put these notes just right next to each other and turn it down, have it pretty far away so that it's not super loud, it really streams together and kind of just sounds like a long note. So I tested this out in Noteblock Studio first, but then whenever I came in to create it in game, I had a lot of difficulty. My first thought was just to make it, as simple as possible, where I've just built like just 4 16th notes, right? So each one of these is a quarter note for every other block. So I just built, 4 notes all delayed by 1 tick, kind of going in a chain, snaking around. And that didn't work. It didn't sound very good because even when I'm all the way back here, when I would test it out, the volume fluctuated a lot because of how it was spread across like 7 blocks. And it was hard to get that solid, held out note sound whenever it's like constantly changing in volume. It was really distracting. So I tried a lot of ways to find out, okay, how can I make this compact? How can I make this work in just a couple of blocks? I tried a lot of ideas, but finally got something to work with this. So how this goes, I have 8 16th notes built here. That's a 1 tick delay. And first, we get 1 pulse that goes through. It plays all 8 of those 16th notes. And then a second pulse, delayed by 8 ticks, goes through as well. So we got da 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 da, and then this is all delayed by 8 ticks. So basically, it's sending 2 pulses through to make this work in a more compact space. And you can hear if I go through. So you can see the pulse travels through once and then back through again. And when you're further away, have it kind of quiet in the mix, it is pretty convincing. It doesn't sound like 16th notes. It sounds like a long sustained note. And well, that's about it. So again, I've got the world download in the description if you want to go through and look at this thing. If you have any more questions, please leave them down below. I'm happy to, talk about this stuff, clarify anything that was confusing. Thanks again for all of the awesome comments and feedback on this build. And I'll be back soon with another cool one. So see you guys.